Hello, it's Tuesday, the 4th of October, and welcome to your 5-minute briefs from Seoul. I'm your host, Hee-Jin Koo. In our first installment of the month, we'll debrief you on US Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to Seoul as she undertook a mission to reinforce the US-South Korean alliance and to calm jitters over Korean-made EVs in the US, and a possible solution on the dilemma by a US Senator in Georgia. Plus, we take a look at South Korea's ambitions to rank among the world's top 3 EV makers by 2030, concerns of an economic slowdown amid soaring inflation and a weakness in the local currency, and a sigh of relief as Korea scraps all COVID-19 testing for arrivals from overseas. Let's begin our 5-minute roundup. US Vice President Kamala Harris visited Seoul last week, holding a meeting with South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol to discuss North Korea's latest provocations and to address Seoul's concerns on electric vehicles in the US. She also toured the heavily fortified inter-Korean border and met South Korean women of distinction. Harris started her whirlwind single-day visit to Seoul with an 85-minute conversation with Yoon to discuss pending issues, including the effect of US President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, under which South Korean electric vehicles by automakers manufactured outside of North America will be excluded from tax subsidies and lose price competitiveness. Harris told Yoon that President Biden is well aware of the concerns in South Korea and that Washington will make an effort to devise ways to resolve the issue. Harris also toured the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas, an area strewn with landmines and separated by electric fences and barbed wires. Harris warned that the U.S. will do, quote, everything in our power to ensure its security commitment to South Korea and that the goal of the two allies remains the complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. North Korea fired off short-range ballistic missiles in 6 launches in a span of 10 days, the latest of which took place earlier this morning. Meanwhile, a possible resolution to the EV conundrum may be in the works. The US Senate submitted a bill seeking a grace period for EVs made outside of North America, allowing them to qualify for tax incentives under the new IRA law, which would allow South Korean car makers a reprieve from losing out in the US market until Hyundai Motor Group begins rolling out American-made EVs in 2025 as planned. Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia, where Hyundai Motor is planning to build a $5.5 billion EV plant, introduced the bill on Capitol Hill last Thursday. The bill outlines steps to defer the battery sourcing provision of the Act until 2025 and its final assembly requirement until 2026, which would allow Hyundai Motor and other Korean automakers a much sought-after breathing room. According to the new law that passed in August, EVs must be assembled in North America or meet a percentage requirement for battery component sourcing in order to qualify for a tax credit of up to $7,500. Seoul has been constantly pressing US politicians and government officials on the matter ever since, so much so that it featured as an agenda during talks between Vice President Harris and South Korean President Yoon. And speaking of the South Korean automotive industry, South Korea's trade ministry said last week it's seeking to double local automakers' global market share in EVs to 12% by 2030 from the current 5% in a bid to emerge as a powerhouse in the world's automotive industry. Under the ministry's midterm roadmap, it plans to help and push South Korean car makers to boost their production of EVs to a combined 3.3 million units by 2030 from around 254,000 units as of 2021. This would help them become one of the world's top 3 EV makers. The ministry pledged to provide tax incentives and various supportive measures to encourage investments worth about 95 trillion won, or roughly $66 billion by 2026, as well as strengthen the automotive industry. Meanwhile, South Korea is aiming to have about half of vehicles on its roads be fully autonomous by 2035. The nation's transport ministry announced on the 19th of September that it is seeking to mass market a level 4 autonomous vehicle in 2027 to release half of newly launched vehicles as level 4 models in 2035. Such ambitious goals notwithstanding, South Korea's top economic ministers and finance policymakers are warning it will step in to stabilize the local financial markets amid concerns of a protracted period of high inflation and weakness in the local currency against the US dollar. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Chang-yong told lawmakers last week that inflation will hover in the 5 to 6% range for a considerable period of time, signaling that policymakers will have to shadow the successive rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve. Lee said a prolonged weakness of the Korean won could further add upward pressure on inflation. We had previously hinted at the possibility of raising the benchmark interest rate by 0.5 percentage point at its Monetary Policy Board meeting slated for this month. The BOK chief said that despite a steady recovery in domestic spending, the impact of global stagnation in the second half of the year has begun to weaken the economy's growth momentum. Meanwhile, the South Korean government injected a combined 5 trillion won to buy back treasury bonds amid growing volatility in South Korea's financial markets. The move came as President Yoon pledged to take timely measures in line with a rapid response blueprint. A think tank under the Federation of Korean Industries on Sunday estimated that the nation will likely post a record-high trade deficit of $48 billion this year, amid soaring raw material and fuel costs, as well as a continuing weakness in the Korean won. South Korea posted a trade deficit for the 6th consecutive month in September, the first such record since 1997. We'll end with a more welcome bit of news for travellers to South Korea. As of the 1st of October, the Asian nation scrapped mandatory COVID-19 PCR testing for overseas arrivals, which were previously a must within the first 24 hours of entry. Second Vice Health and Welfare Minister Lee Gi-il attributed the move to a steep decline in infections among arrivals, to a mere 0.9% in September, down from 1.3% in August. PCR tests will remain available free of charge at community health centres for those who develop symptoms within 3 days of entry. The country also completely lifted its remnant outdoor mask mandate as of the 25th of September, allowing people in Korea to attend outdoor sports matches, concerts, and demonstrations without having to wear masks after 523 days. Still, indoor mask mandates will remain in place for the time being in light of an uptick in flu infections and a possible resurgence of COVID-19 cases. Expert consensus is divided on indoor mandates, with many agreeing that they will eventually need to be eliminated, but still divided on its timing and scope. That wraps it up for this episode of 5-Minute Briefs from Seoul. This has been Hee Jin Koo for KBSI, wishing you a great week.